time for the Fight Night Picks podcast with your host, Craig Allen.
All right, so episode number 34 of the Fight Night Picks podcast. So today I'm joined by two really great guests. We have 8th-ranked UFC featherweight Josh Emmett coming on. He's going to talk about, his rise in the California MMA regional scene, and then came into the UFC as a lightweight. He was a lightweight champ in California. Faced some tough opponents, dropped down to featherweight, and then went on a tear and made it up to the top of the featherweight division. Didn't fare too well against Jeremy Stephens in February of this year, and actually suffered some pretty gruesome injuries. So we're going to talk to him about his road to recovery, when we could see Josh back in the UFC. As well, we're joined by UFC lightweight John Makdessi, kind of close to home. He's from Halifax, training out of Roufusport. So we're going to talk about his, changing of camps from TriStar to Roufusport. He's found a lot of success recently and had that fight of the night a couple of weeks ago against Ross Pearson at UFC on Fox in Calgary. And then at the end of the show, there's no UFC this week. There's no Bellator. So I'm going to give you my complete guide to some of the MMA events that you can check out. And again, be sure to check out Fight Night Picks for the Fans tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. Eastern on Dialogue. I want to hear from you guys. So anybody listening to the podcast, make sure you tune in and come ready with some questions. So without further ado, let's get into the conversation with Josh coming up. And I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. So to start, what was it like getting a call from the UFC when you were fighting, just straight out of California?
Oh, it was awesome. It was a dream come true. It was kind of what I've been chasing my whole MMA career. For me, it was only to fight in the UFC. And if I lost any of my regional fights, I would have, hung it up and called it quits right then. But when I got the call, it was, it was just a great day. I was training, got a call from Joe Silva, and he asked if I wanted to fight in the Netherlands. And I said, of course. I didn't even know when it was or who I was fighting. I just said yes. And then come to find out after I got off the phone, I thought it was like 2 weeks to come. But then my manager said, no, the fight's in 4 days. So I was like, oh, no, I leave tomorrow. So I literally finished training. I went home, packed, and then hopped on a plane the next morning, went to Rotterdam.
And then you were fighting at what, lightweight when you were on the regional circuit?
Yeah, I was fighting at lightweight, and then I got into the UFC at lightweight, and my goal was to always go 145 when I got in, but since I had success, I just stayed there, and that was still somewhat of a hard cut to get down to 155, but I won a few fights, and then with the third lightweight fight I had in the UFC, I lost a split decision that I think I won that fight still. I feel like I got hometown, but at least the good thing about that was it made me go down, because otherwise if I won that fight, I would have still been at 155, and I wouldn't be in the position that I am now or had the opportunities that I have had at featherweight.
Yeah, and since going down to featherweight, you got a win last October, and then of course you skyrocketed with the win against Ricardo Lamas at UFC on Fox in Winnipeg. What's the weather like in Winnipeg?
Oh, it was that was something different. It was I had a good time there, but it was freezing. It was I want to say it was like 20 degrees, but I guess at that time it was warm for everyone in Winnipeg. They said normally around that time it's like -8, -10 degrees. So they were saying this was t-shirt weather, but I was like, there's no way in hell. It was still 20 degrees outside. It was freezing, but it was fun.
Yeah, you guys got lucky that week. I was checking the forecast and checking to see what the fighters were saying, because usually Winnipeg's probably the coldest place in the country.
Yeah, I still thought it was, but not as cold as it typically is.
No, for sure. So, you shot right up the rankings. You rank 8th right now. Of course, the fight in February didn't go your way against Jeremy Stephens. How's the recovery process been going for you since then?
It's going. It's slow but coming along. I've just been seeing a lot of therapists, and that's about it. A lot of doctors, therapists. I had surgery, and it's coming along. For a while, it was pretty bad. For a month or two, I didn't think I was ever gonna be able to fight again, just because I've never had those type of injuries, and but now it's every day. It's a little better, and now I can't wait to get back in there and get back to training and hopefully fight by the end of the year or early next year.
As far as getting clear to resume, activities in the cage, is that something that's going to come up soon?
Yeah, I got suspended medically for 6 months. So, yeah, it should be the end of August, maybe September. I'll get cleared to get back to training. So I want to just kind of go in there and I really haven't done much, but yeah, I really haven't done much, especially the first like 3-4 months as far as working out. But I'm getting back on a diet now. I'm starting to be a little more active, and yeah, I'm just gonna ease back into things. I don't want to jump into it too quick, just because I've seen with our teammates and other people in the sport that when they've had a severe concussion and they got back too soon and started sparring or fighting, to ruin their career. And I feel like I have such a long career ahead of me. So it's like, I don't, it'd be nice to make some money. And of course I want to do that, but I really don't want to jump in too soon, so where I can jeopardize my future. So I'm going to get back in there. I keep saying, December 29th card would be awesome in Vegas if it was up to me. But then again, I'm going to just see how I feel once I get back into training. And then especially once I get back into sparring, maybe in October, November, I'll start to spar again, and then kind of take it from there. So that's why I'm thinking maybe like a timeline, maybe January or February for me, realistically.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as training, you're at a world-class spot there with Team Alpha Male. When did you get involved with those guys?
I've been there, like one of the longest guys there. I'm from Sacramento, so 2005. I went into Uriah's gym when he opened it, and because I've always been a huge fan of this sport. I was finishing up my junior college wrestling career, so I wanted to like transition into fighting. So I started going in there, just taking classes, and Uriah saw potential in me, and he came up to me one day and said, "Hey, are you thinking about fighting?" I was like, yeah, of course. That's why I'm here. And he invited me to the pro practices and just told me he saw a lot of potential in me. And so I was doing some of the practices, and then I got a scholarship to go wrestle in 2007. So I decided to go down, get my degree, get better at wrestling, and then come back and pick up where I left off. I knew I'd get better at wrestling, which would, help me with fighting, because I'd be fighting or wrestling at the 4-year level. So I went ahead and did that. I graduated in May of 2010, came back to Sacramento and kind of, started off there. And I want to say like June or July of 2010, trained for a few months, and then had my first amateur fight. I think I did 2 that year, or maybe I did 1, at the end of the year. Did 2 amateur fights and then went pro.
And then, like, as far as picking up jiu-jitsu, was that something that you were looking forward to doing all along? Did you pick it up once you went to Team Alpha Male? How did you get involved with that?
Yeah, it was really just learning once I got to Team Alpha Male, because I was more like just a wrestler. So I would take people down, and that was kind of humbling when you would shoot a double leg, and leave your neck exposed, and it was just so easy for people to get chokes. And yeah, but I don't know, I pick up everything really fast, and I don't know, even with like striking, I feel like it was just natural to me. I felt like the same, as far as, your footwork was pretty similar to boxing and kickboxing, but obviously you have a little wider stance in wrestling. But everything just came real natural to me, and just easy. So I constantly, every day, I'm learning with everything and continue just to learn. And it's been it almost like was a new passion of mine, because I fell in love with wrestling at such a young age. And then as I was finishing college, I was almost a little burned out on it. And then when I started doing MMA, it was like, it lit that fire again, and to this day, I still, have so much more to learn, and so much, I have a long ways to come, and I can always get better every day.
And I mean, so you learned the jiu-jitsu kind of as it came, as you trained. And I'm sure a lot of fans were really, surprised to see you competing at ACBJJ 14 over in Russia. How did that opportunity come about?
It was, we were actually in Hawaii. I was with my wife, and we took my mom and in-laws to Hawaii, and I got this message from a promoter out there. And when was this? I want to say it was like the beginning of June. June 1st or maybe May 30th or something like that, if I would be interested. And I was still having all these issues from the fight, and I hadn't done anything. And my goal was to get back to training, like the first week of June when we came back from Hawaii. And so I was just thinking about it. I was like, man, maybe this will be like, uh, just motivate me. This will motivate me to actually get in the gym and start training and then go out there. And I've always wanted to go to Moscow. And so it was just kind of like a free trip. And, man, I'll do that all day, go out there. And it's basically like a wrestling match. I wrestled my whole life in college and everything and never got paid for it. And it would be more dangerous just going to a wrestling practice at Team Alpha Male than to do a 15-minute wrestling match. So I was like, I just talked to my doctor and I said, hey, what do you think about this? And he's like, they were kind of on the fence, didn't really want me to do that, take any impact to my head, but I kind of felt like I had to do it because it would motivate me. And at that time, my wife and I we were in the process of buying a home. And so I was like, hey, this will be kind of the down payment. So it definitely helped out. It was fun. So I took it. I trained for like 2 weeks, just light technique with my jiu-jitsu coach. We never went live. And we just figured we'd save it for the match. So we trained 2.5 weeks, flew out to Moscow, and did the little match. And it was fun. Like from not doing anything for 4 months to just going out there and having a match. I was like, oh, I was in better shape than I thought.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like it didn't go too bad, and you got to take on former UFC fighter Zubair Tukhugov. And I've had ACB fighters on the podcast before. I had Adam Townsend from Tennessee, and he said he really enjoyed his experience going over to Russia and fighting for those guys.
Yeah, no, it was awesome, and it was it was just cool. It was they took good care of us. They flew us out on business class, and then took care of our hotel and the food, and they were just super accommodating. And even the pay was pretty well. It was fun. It was during the World Cup, so we didn't get to go to any games. We went to the fan village. We got to meet a lot of people. Even Moscow, just the architecture, the food, the people. It was a lot different than I assumed it was going to be. I thought it'd be a little different, but I got over there and I was like, man, this is awesome. So it's like just like what we hear in the media, man, was nothing like. I'm sure other parts can be a little different, but it was awesome. We didn't have any problems, and I'm just glad we went out there.
No, that's good to hear, and hopefully, the road to recovery goes smoothly, and we're able to see you fighting, whether it's the end of this year or the start of next year. Want to thank you so much for coming on, and where can fans find you online? If you got any sponsors, floor is yours.
Yeah, as far as my Twitter and Instagram handle are Josh Emmett UFC for Instagram and Twitter, and then I just have a Josh Emmett fan page on Facebook. And then just everyone that's kind of been there for me and helped out, I appreciate them. Trifecta Meals, they're awesome. That's one of my big sponsors right now, and they just they're a big sponsor of the UFC now. It just I think last week is when they announced that too. So they've been great, and everyone's got to check out their website.
Awesome having Josh on the podcast. I really appreciate it. It'll be great to see him back in the octagon, whether it's later on this year or early next year. I mean, there's a lot of fights to be made in the UFC's featherweight division. You've got a lot of movers and shakers there with Brian Ortega, Jose Aldo getting the win at UFC in Calgary, Frankie Edgar, Renato Moicano, Chad Mendes coming back and starching Miles Jury. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Josh and when we can see him back in a cage. So let's get into our interview with John Makdessi, UFC lightweight, talk about his fight of the night performance in Calgary against Ross Pearson, his changing of training camps from TriStar over to Roufusport, and if we can potentially see him at UFC Moncton or UFC in Toronto. So here's John. Awesome, John. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, and really want to congratulate you on the win in Calgary and the fight of the night bonus.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so, I mean, you get into martial arts from a young age growing up in Halifax. When did you start focusing more on training for MMA?
I started basically martial arts at 6. Mixed martial arts. I got introduced to mixed martial arts around 22 years old. After my kickboxing career, I wanted to go professional and make a living out of it. And kickboxing at that time was dying out, so I got introduced to mixed martial arts, and I got connected with TriStar Gym and Faraz Zahabi, and I was under their umbrella for 2 years, and then after that, basically, I wanted something different, and I got introduced to Duke Roufus from my manager, Mitch Mayberger. He connected me with Duke Roufus, and now I'm affiliated with Roufusport.
Yeah, I mean that's awesome. There must be a lot of great training partners there with Roufusport. What's it been like training with Duke himself?
Yeah, Duke is an amazing guy. He has a lot of passion. He has a lot of he knows how to motivate the fighters. He has a lot of knowledge, and also he applies himself. A lot of coaches don't really understand. Like, it's not only about the X's and O's. It's not only just textbook. It's also a lot of things that it takes an individual who kind of walked the walk. Somebody that went through the fighting career, went through the ups and downs, and as a mixed martial artist, as a fighter, there's a lot of things that most people don't really see. They just see they just see the fighters go on television, fight, and that's it. But behind the cameras, behind the spotlight, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, a lot of struggle. It's a big sacrifice. But most guys stop their whole sacrifice a lot of things to kind of get, chase the goal.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, so you grew up in Halifax, like you said, your background in kickboxing, as well, black belt in karate and a black belt in taekwondo as well. If you were somebody, or if you could suggest to somebody looking to start training in a discipline, what martial art would you recommend to them?
Well, I always believed in my heart that you always have to follow your passion. You always have to follow your heart. Before you get into before you go into all the details, like for example, I can only speak on behalf of my experience.
Yep.
I got into martial arts through just kind of accidental, and I kind of once you kind of discover something that you like, that you're passionate about, that you're willing to go through the hardship and all that stuff. That's the most important thing. Regardless of if you become a professional fighter, regardless of if you take it to a next level, just as an individual, any like I said, martial arts is a lifestyle. It's therapeutic. It's something. It's a good outlet for the younger youth. To give themselves good structure, discipline. So for me, it was very disciplined. It's good for me. From growing up hyperactive and trouble kids.
Yeah. So I mean, you switched over to Roufusport, almost found pretty much instant success. And I mean, going into the fight against Ross Pearson, what was the game plan against a guy who just wouldn't quit in the ring?
The game plan was kind of keep it simple, keep it straightforward. So the game plan was just kind of go with the flow. I had to adjust, and me and Duke Roufus were on the same page. We don't believe in just like one specific, okay, this is what's gonna happen. Because in a fight, through experience, anything can happen. That's why we train day in, day out to figure different scenarios, different situations. That's why we work all across the board. We have a lot of different types of game plans, and I was very fortunate that I was a better man that night.
Yeah, for sure, and that's a great plan to have, and it's great to have Duke in your corner. So I mean, looking ahead, when can we possibly see you back in the octagon? I know you had mentioned possibly UFC in Moncton or maybe even UFC in Toronto in December.
Yeah, my goal is to aim for Toronto card, hopefully get on the main card.
Yep.
And fight a top 15, top 20 fighter. Listen, anything can happen in the game, but proper planning, proper game planning, proper preparation. Having a good team now, I'm happy with the communication my team has. So we're aiming for Toronto, get a bigger name, and hopefully, get on the win streak and ask for a title contention.
Awesome, John. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate having you on, and hopefully we can see you on that Toronto card. Where can fans find you online?
Yeah, anyone can, all my social outlets, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, John Makdessi. You guys can always, anyone that wants to check out any latest feeds, updates, you can go to my social media at John Makdessi.
Awesome. It was great having John on the podcast. Hopefully we get to see him on that UFC Toronto card. It'd be a little close to home for him, like he said, living in Montreal right now, training out of Roufusport. So as far as the camp move, seems to be going really well for him. So hopefully he can keep up that run. I mean, two wins in a row right now. And same goes for Josh Emmett. I mean, hopefully he can progress through, the injury that he has. Hopefully he can get cleared to fight. Maybe we can see him by the end of this year, if not early next year. So, like I said at the start of the show, we don't have any UFC this weekend. There's also no Bellator, so no major promotions holding events, no Cage Warriors, no ACB. But there are some more events this week. So I put out an article a couple days ago and titled it Best of the Rest MMA Viewing Guide for this weekend. So tonight, just probably when this episode comes out, you're going to have LFA 47 coming at you from Dallas, Texas at 9 p.m. Eastern. And it's going to be on Access TV. So you've got Jackson versus Jennerman. And the co-main there, you've got Moles and Cheeks. And that's a good fight as well. So in that main event, you got 15-2-1 Damon Jackson. He's fought in the UFC. He's also fought in Bellator. And he's taken on 12-3 Nate Jennerman. And between the two guys, they have 24 of 27 wins by finish. So somebody's probably going to get a finish in that fight. They're each riding Jackson a 3-fight and Jennerman 4-fight win streaks. So pretty interesting fight there. As well, you got up-and-coming prospect Levi Moles, who's sitting at 8-2, and he's taking on Charles Cheeks III, who's sitting at 13-6. And for Cheeks, 6 of his 13 wins are by submission. For Moles, he's got all sorts of different finishes. He's got 3 knockouts, 3 submissions, 2 decisions. So look for Moles, really good up-and-coming prospect to try and keep an eye on. I try and, inform you guys of some of the fighters that I'm watching. Levi Moles is one of them, and he's only 23 years old, so already a co-main of an LFA card. And, maybe the UFC signs him. Maybe he ends up on Contender Series. We've seen a lot of LFA prospects end up on the Contender Series, like Ian Hainish, Jeff Hughes. Those are some of the names that come to mind, but there's been all sorts of them. So LFA 47 tonight. And I sent out a tweet last night to see what you guys might be paying attention to this weekend. And LFA was at the top of the list. So another great card to be paying attention to this week. Coming at you at 9 o'clock Eastern in the morning tomorrow, Saturday. EFC Worldwide 72, Van Staden versus Mazzani. And you can catch the prelims for free on Facebook and the main card on EFC TV. I believe that one's a pay-per-view there, but you can go on their website to watch it. So, it's a really good card. I've kind of ranted and raved about EFC a little bit. KSW welterweight champ Dricus du Plessis was also the EFC champ over in South Africa. So, Jay Cuccinello, who was on the last season of The Ultimate Fighter 28, he competed for EFC at one point. Don Madge, who's in the UFC. So they've had a lot of success here recently, pushing out fighters. And I really think that Martin Van Staden, who's their lightweight champ right now, sitting at 26-10, is another guy that you should try and keep your eyes on. Looking to defend against the American 16-6 Mazzani. And, Dave Mazzani, he's had fights against PFL's Ray Cooper III, who just ended up with a knockout win there over Jake Shields. So Dave Mazzani fought Ray Cooper. He's also fought the UFC's Don Madge as well over in EFC. And at the same time, your champ in Van Staden has fought Dricus du Plessis at one point and former UFC star Brian Ebersol. So that could be one, if you don't have much going on tomorrow morning, maybe check out that card, whether it's on Facebook or on EFC TV. Also, the return of M1 to the States. You've got Road to M1 USA coming at you on Saturday at 9 p.m. Eastern on Fight TV. So you can pay for that pay-per-view. I was talking to former guest of the show, Adam Townsend. Possibility he ends up cornering a fighter there. So you might see primetime Adam Townsend out at that pay-per-view. So M1, this is their American subsidiary. And it's kind of strange because they held events from 2008 to 2011. They held a total of 12 cards in the States. And I know somebody on Twitter came out and said, I saw a card, whether it was in Phoenix, Scottsdale, Glendale, an M1 card, and I loved it. They've got the Rage, the hybrid ring cage that I'm sure they're going to get rid of, once the UFC starts to develop it as a feeder league over in Russia. But this is really interesting. We haven't seen a card from M1 in the States in a long time. In the main event, a pair of 9-3 middleweights. You've got former Bellator vet David Mundell, and he's taking on Douglas Usher. And so Mundell, of his 9 wins, 6 of them are by decision, whereas, Usher, 8 of 9 wins are by finish, and he's got 7 knockouts or TKOs. So that'll be a pretty good main event. One of the fights I'm looking forward to the most this weekend, I'm definitely going to be tuning into it, is the co-main event for this card. So you've got 11-4 Cuban UFC vet Yoslandi Izquierdo, and he's taking on 5-3 Russian Vadim Olgar, sorry. And I mean, Ogar, he was on the wrong side of a 30-second knockout against Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series recent signee, Sadiq Yusuff, in August of last year. And Sadiq Yusuff really impressed a lot of people. I mean, in his last fight in the Contender Series, earning a UFC contract, so a guy to watch. But at the same time, Ogar against Izquierdo, it should be a really good fight. I mean, Izquierdo, he went 0-2 in the UFC, had losses to Reza Madadi, who just got signed by ACB and was supposed to compete on that Malmo card in Sweden. I believe that was ACB 91, but they ended up scrapping that. So I see the next 2 ACB cards for later on this year. They've already started to stack them, and fingers crossed they hold up, because I love watching ACB. Their big thing is more fights, more fun. And they're always moving fighters and people in and out of the ring. They keep it going, and it's a really great pace, compared to some of the FS1 cards, some of the UFC pay-per-views. So, make sure you have a look at M1 Global USA. And if you're a Nighthawk and you're still up on Saturday night / Sunday morning, Ryzen 12 from Nagoya, Japan at 2 a.m. Eastern on Sunday morning. So main event features 20-6. Yosuke Yachi, and he's taking on the unbeaten 8-0 Luis Gustavo. And you can catch Ryzen 12 on Fight TV. So Ryzen's on Fight, M1's on Fight, EFC, you can catch that on their website and also on Facebook for the prelims, and then LFA on Access TV tonight. So that just about does this for episode number 34 of the Fight Night Picks podcast. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube. Check me out on iTunes as well as Stitcher for the podcast version, the audio podcast. And be sure to tune in tomorrow for Fight Night Picks for the Fans, episode number 2, where my co-host is Evil Eddie. And hopefully, you come in with a lot of questions and we can answer them and talk a little bit of MMA tomorrow. So that's at 4:30 p.m. Eastern. And I'll post the link once again, and hopefully you can join me. So we'll see you again next week. I'm going to have a Bellator 204 preview show, and it's already stacked. I've got some interviews already done. So really looking forward to that one, and we'll see you next week.